Hey guys, welcome back to Intelligent Faith 315. This is Pastor Jake, so good to be with you today. We're going to be continuing lesson number 2 in our foundational apologetics class, Reason to Believe. I encourage you to go to iTunes and type in this title as you see it here. Notice it's in the singular, Reason to Believe. And if you type that in on iTunes, you'll get our podcast. It has about 25 episodes or so. It's growing on a weekly basis. Also, if you are on YouTube watching this, I encourage you to go over to intelligentfaith315.com. It's our mother website. And check that out. You'll get all the videos, links, articles, and other apologetic resources we have for demonstrating the truth and the proof and the rationality of the Christian worldview. And if you're on Intelligent Faith 315, I encourage you to go over to YouTube, type in Intelligent Faith 315, and you'll get all of our video content in one glance. As I said, today is part 1 of lesson 2 at Reason to Believe, our foundational class in apologetics. Today's class is going to be called the War of the Worldviews. We talked about in our first class, what is apologetics and why do it? We discussed that in 3 parts. And so here today we're going to begin discussing what is a worldview, number 1. And then also, what are the different worldviews that are represented in the world? And then how does the Christian worldview, which is classical theism, how does that stack up against them? So in part 1 of our class today, we'll just be getting into kind of a general introduction as to what is a worldview. Then we'll be going through all 7 worldviews. And then finally, we'll be comparing theism, actually Christian theism, obviously, with each of the different worldviews and how it stacks up and what the weaknesses of these other worldviews are. So first off, as I said, what is a worldview? This is very important for you to know. It's very important for you to be able to think in these terms as you discuss and share your faith with people and dialogue with other folks. So a worldview could basically be defined as a way of viewing the world. Very simple, right? A worldview is a view of the world. It's just really how you look at life, how you look at reality. Another way you could define it is it's the mental glasses through which you view reality. A word picture that's often used for describing a worldview are spectacles, or eyeglasses. And so just as a person would wear glasses and everything that they see is in a sense colored and affected by the type of lens or the coloring of the lens, the prescription of the lens, their view of everything in their life is affected by what type of glasses they're wearing. So your worldview is like that. It affects everything you see in life. And the reason why this is important is because everyone has a worldview. Let me say that again. Everyone has a worldview. So it's only a question of what type of a worldview do you have? And is it a good worldview or is it a bad worldview? In the sense of, is it very rational? Does it have any problems? Is it logical? Is it strong? So a worldview is a way of viewing the world, and it's mental glasses through which you can view reality. And just ask yourself, you the viewer watching this video, what is your worldview? Do you know what it is? Can you define it? Could you tell me the features of your worldview? If not, that's something you should start thinking about. Someone once wisely said, we need to start thinking worldviewishly, especially as Christians. Because precisely what's happening today is it's a discussion, it's really a war of worldviews. The atheistic worldview, the pantheistic worldview, the theistic worldview, and about 4 different others. It's really a discussion of worldviews. And so I need to first understand my worldview, what it is and what makes it logical and rational, hopefully, and then how to discuss and relate that worldview with others and help them understand perhaps the weaknesses or the strengths of their worldviews as well. So it's a way of viewing the world. It's the mental glasses through which you view reality, but also it's the lens that you look through to understand the world. Kind of the same idea there, but just a different way of phrasing it. The lens that you look through to understand the world. Everything that you try to understand in your life, whether it's law or whether it's politics or whether it's anything of that nature, you are going to try to understand it through the lens of your worldview. So finally, it's the intellectual framework that we use to make sense of everything. The intellectual framework that you look through to make sense of everything in your world and in your life. So that's that basic way of understanding a worldview. So there are 7 major worldviews, and depending on who you talk to and depending on what books you're reading and so forth, you might get a different list than this. But there are probably about 7 major worldviews. And as you can see here, you have theism, deism, finite godism, atheism, pantheism, panentheism, and polytheism. So what we're going to do in the next section of our video is define what each of these worldviews is, and then we're going to basically try to analyze them later on, see what the weaknesses are in each one of them, and then we're going to eventually compare them to theism. So let's get into these. First of all, you have theism. So this is, of course, the view relating to God, that God created everything. As you can see perhaps in this smaller frame here, theism, the view that there is one personal, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, transcendent, unchanging, eternal, holy, loving creator. So theism, this is a worldview that's held by Jews and Muslims, and if you want kind of a mental picture to think of theism, think of this picture right here. It would be the idea of God, or theos, the theistic creator, holding the world, really holding the universe in his hands. So that's theism, worldview number one, God created all. The basic beliefs of theism, as I said, God created the world. That means he's transcendent. He is outside of the world and apart from it. Number two, God sustains the world. He not only has created it, but he sustains it in its being. And so that means that he is immanent. And then thirdly, God does supernatural acts. If a supernatural God exists, it only makes sense to understand that supernatural acts can occur, so we call these miracles. So in theism, God created the world, God sustains the world, and God can do supernatural acts. Or you could say in theism, God is transcendent, God is immanent, and God can perform miracles. And as you can see over here, the proponents of theism would be Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. These are commonly referred to as the three great monotheistic religions. And some of the famous thinkers of the past who have been theists would include Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, and of course C.S. Lewis. So that's basically Christian theism. Well, theism in a general sense, Christianity is a part of that. Second worldview would be deism. We put up Albert Einstein's picture here because he's, of course, very well known, and Albert Einstein was a deist. This is the view that God is beyond the world, but he is not in it. So God exists, but he's not really involved with the world. And so the good word picture to keep in your mind here is that God creates the world, but then he, in a sense, waves goodbye to it. He is distant and he is separated from it, kind of like Star Wars in a galaxy far, far away, but even more so. So just keep in mind here that, of course, Einstein, he did believe in a creator. He did believe in God. But it was a God who was separate and not involved with the cosmos, with the world, with people. So that's deism. God is beyond the world, and he's not in it. Some of the basic beliefs of deism, as I said, God created the world, so he is transcendent. He is separate from his creation. He's transcendent. But God doesn't sustain the world in deism, so he is not immanent. And God doesn't do any miracles. Because to do that, he would have to be intimately involved in his world, and in deism, they don't believe that he is. So God created the world, but he doesn't sustain it and doesn't do miracles in deism. Albert Einstein and Thomas Jefferson are probably the two most famous deists that the world knows today. Some proponents of deism would be Francois-Marie Voltaire, John Toland, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine. These are some famous intellectuals from the past who have held to a deistic worldview. It's interesting to note also that in modern day times, many intellectuals and thinkers, scientists, and even philosophers who used to consider themselves agnostic or atheist have come to belief in God, in a deistic creator God, such as Antony Flew or I believe it was Robert Jastrow. But definitely Antony Flew, the most notorious atheist philosopher from the 1950s, he wrote a book, and it was entitled There Is a God. It was originally called There Is No God, and the no is crossed out, and then an A is put above that. And Antony Flew, through intelligent design in the DNA molecule, he came to understand that there was a deistic creator God. So that is worldview number two. God is beyond the world and not in it. The third one is one that you may not have thought about much, but you are familiar with it. As you can see, the picture we've chosen here is Thor, because finite godism is precisely that. God is beyond the world, but he is limited in power or his perfection. So God is beyond the world, but he's very, very limited. So he exists, but he's limited and he's imperfect. A good word picture there would be to look at, or would be to think of God as creating and holding up the world, but see how the hand is much smaller, because again, this is a finite God, not infinite, not all-powerful, not all-knowing, but he's finite. So finite Godism would hold to, let's perhaps say, kind of a divine figure, but very limited and imperfect, but a lot more powerful than humans. Some of the basic beliefs: finite God created the world, a finite God forms, and it's an eternal world, so it's ancient. So there's a modern version of finite Godism that God created the world, and the ancient version says that he forms an eternal world. God does not completely control the world, and evil shows that God is limited in his power and or his perfection, and God doesn't do any miracles. So those would be some of the beliefs of finite Godism. So he created the world, or he formed it, depending on whether you believe in an ancient or a modern version. He doesn't completely control the world. He's limited in his power, perfection, and he does not do any miracles. Some proponents of this view would be Plato, John Stuart Mill, and Rabbi Harold Kushner. So Plato, one of the great thinkers of Western thought, he believed in God. He defeated atheism in his day in about 8 different ways, but Plato's God was a finite God. And Rabbi Kushner, we'll be speaking about him, he doesn't believe that God is able to defeat evil, and we need to pray for God and help God out, and this is because Rabbi Kushner believes in a finite, limited God. Number 4 would be atheism, and this is very, very well understood by most people. Atheism is simply the negative prefix in Greek, a, and in the Greek word theos, no God, and as you can see, no God at all. Now, please understand that you're going to hear a lot of atheists say that they're trying to redefine atheism to mean a lack of belief in God. And that is not the classical definition, the historical definition of atheism. You could even look it up in the Cambridge or the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy. Atheism is a claim to knowledge. It is a claim to truth. It is a positive truth claim that there is no God. So it is the positive belief that there is no God. So just so you have that clear. And of course, the word picture there would be just the world, just the universe, because there's nothing supernatural outside of the universe to create it or to sustain it. Some of the basic beliefs of atheism would be that there's no God, infinite or finite. Evil exists, and evil is evidence against God, and it's really the best argument that atheists try to use against God. It's not a good argument, but it's really the best one that they do have. No miracles are possible, because if there's no supernatural being, then of course there can't be any supernatural acts. And God is an illusion or a projection. This is what men like Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, or Feuerbach would say about theists, is that God is an illusion or a projection. And then of course some of the proponents of atheism, as you can see here, would be Lucretius, Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, or Richard Dawkins. So those would be some of the proponents of atheism. That's all we'll do for today. Want to keep it short and sweet. Do encourage you to come back next time. We'll continue with part 2 of lesson 1, the War of the Worldviews. Encourage you to come back and continue to track with us through our class, Reason to Believe. We're discussing worldviews now, but we're going to eventually get into, is truth real? Does it exist? Can it be known? Is it absolute? We'll then get into arguments for God's existence, which is called natural theology. And then after that, we'll get into the historical evidence for the New Testament and Old Testament scriptures, the person of Jesus, and then the resurrection. So lots of interesting stuff coming your way. Come back and join us. Until then, have an intelligent faith.